So one of the most common forms of retaliation, and one of our worst fears when we're dealing with a discrimination claim, is losing our job. Retaliation is illegal, but that doesn't always stop employers from doing it. So tonight I'm going to talk about two cases to illustrate how important it is to fight back when your employer tries to retaliate, and how you can do that. So I'm going to talk about my case and Santos versus NASA. I'll put a link in the description so you can go read the latest decision from the appellate judge yourself. Tonight I'm just going to talk through a couple points. Before we get too deeply into it, NASA is a federal sector employer, but anyone should be able to adapt this approach. Federal agencies use a performance improvement plan, a PIP, to put subpar employees on notice. The PIP sets up performance goals, and if we fail to meet any of those goals, we can be fired. And if your boss wants to fire you, it's easy enough for them to do that by making your PIP goals as subjective and difficult to reach as possible. NASA tried putting me on a PIP even though my performance wasn't subpar. They tried again with Santos a few years later and actually managed to pull it off. Santos wasn't a subpar performer either. NASA's basic problem with both Santos and myself was that we used too much leave. Santos' supervisor set him up by giving him a nearly impossible assignment. She used that one work product to justify putting him on a PIP, even though overall, his performance was well above average, like mine. Predictably, the improvement goals that Santos' supervisor set up, those were also impossible, and Santos was fired. He filed a grievance at the Merit Systems Protection Board, which is the board that protects the rights of federal workers. The board looked at all the goals in Santos' PIP, and they looked at his supervisor's evaluation against those goals, and they concurred with the supervisor that Santos had fallen short, so they upheld his firing. Then he sued in federal court, who also upheld it. He appealed that decision, and the appellate judge finally noticed that, hey, maybe since he wasn't a subpar performer in the first place, he shouldn't have been put on a PIP. But rather than find in Santos' favor, he sent his case back to the Merit Systems Protection Board. A couple years before Santos, NASA tried the same thing with me, but I was able to stop them from putting me on a PIP. Comparing my case to Santos v. NASA taught me a couple of things. First, whatever your employer has tried with someone before you, they'll probably try with you too. So a little research about your employer's past methods might serve you well. Second, it also proves how important it is to fight back against shady practices, especially illegal retaliation. Like Santos, most of us believe that if we're cooperative, our employer is more likely to treat us fairly. But by the time you're facing illegal retaliation, your employer is actively trying to harm you. And cooperating is only going to make that easier for them. So today we're going to talk about how you can fight back against an unfair disciplinary action. First, you need to know what should be happening in situations like yours. And you can find that in your employer's written policies. When your employer violates a written policy, it raises questions about why at EEOC. You want to itemize all the policy violations that you can find. Next, we want to document those policy violations. You want to email copies of everything that you get to yourself if possible. It gives you a timestamp on the information, and it also guarantees that you'll continue to have access to that information if your employer happens to fire you. First, you want to document the actual policies. As soon as you file your claim for discrimination, I recommend getting copies of all your employer's relevant policies. And I've listed what a few of those are here and in the description. Next, we want to document the specific actions that were taken against you and the reasons your employer gave you for doing those things. Keep copies of everything your employer gives you in writing. And if they don't put anything in writing, I'll tell you how I handled that sort of thing in just a minute. Third, gather some documents you can use to challenge your employer's pretext about your performance or conduct. And again, I've listed some examples here and in the description. Once you've documented all that, it's time to challenge your employer's illegal actions. So instead of arguing about all the ways they've violated policy, I found asking questions was a lot more effective. Now, I went into this just trying to document NASA's retaliation. I didn't have a clue that I could actually stop anything, but I did. So here's the email. I'll put the full text in the description. and just hit the high points here. First, state the facts about what happened, and then start asking questions about specific violations. NASA shouldn't have been threatening me in a meeting about my EEOC claim. And a diversity manager shouldn't ever threaten employees. My performance was excellent, so putting me on a PIP was inappropriate. NASA violated my appeal rights. And I always ended everything with, "Oh, by the way, you still haven't accommodated me." Asking questions instead of making statements put NASA in a catch-22. If they answered my questions honestly, they'd have to admit that they had retaliatory motives. If they answered with pretext, I'd be able to prove it was pretext. And if they hadn't answered my questions at all but fired me anyway, I would have had some pretty strong evidence of retaliation. So instead of doing any of those things, they emailed me back and said, "Oh, no, you misunderstood. We don't intend to put you on a PIP at all." And it was never mentioned to me again. Now, I can't fault Santos for trying to please his boss. That's an admirable thing. Unless your boss is actively trying to harm you. Then your goal should be stopping them. Or if you can't stop them, it should be getting enough evidence to make them pay later. Now is not the time to try harder. It's the time to put on your big kid pants and fight back.